The movie begins on what looks like a completely normal morning. A young woman steps outside for a run, waves goodbye to her husband, and disappears down the street while the rest of the neighborhood prepares for the rain everyone has been expecting. The clouds are getting darker by the minute, though, and there is something about the sky that feels heavier than an ordinary storm. Before long, the rain comes down hard. Around the same time, Jason arrives home carrying the snacks his daughter Ruth loves. Inside, the family gets ready to go out just as they had planned, but when Ruth and her brother Graham try the front door, it refuses to open. At first, nobody thinks much of it. Maybe the lock is stuck. Maybe the weather has warped the frame. Jason walks over, gives the handle a try, and realizes the door is completely sealed. He checks the back door. Same problem. Then the windows. Every one of them is locked in place, as if the entire house has been fused shut from the outside. The confusion quickly turns into fear. Jason checks the phone, then the internet. Both are dead. Even the family dog seems to sense something is wrong and keeps whining toward the walls. Jason finally decides that if the doors will not open, he will force one of them down. He charges at the front door and slams into it with all his strength, only to be thrown backward in a way that makes no physical sense. Shaken but stubborn, he grabs a sharp tool and attacks one of the windows instead. Anne, his wife, watches nervously as cracks spread through the glass. For a second, it looks as if he has finally broken through. Then, right in front of them, the damaged glass seals itself back together. The cracks vanish like they were never there. Jason moves from window to window, refusing to accept what he is seeing. He strikes each one, but every bit of damage repairs itself almost instantly. At the final window, something across the street catches his attention. A light flicks on inside a neighboring house. That is when the family realizes they are not alone. Every home they can see is sealed exactly the same way. The whole neighborhood is trapped. There is one exception. The woman who went out running earlier is still outside. From far away, Jason and the others can see her moving through the rain, apparently trying to reach help. That small detail gives everyone a little hope. Maybe she can contact the police. Maybe she can tell somebody what is happening. For now, the family agrees to wait. With nothing else to do, they begin communicating with the neighbors through the windows. People write messages on large pieces of paper and hold them up to the glass. At first, the messages are practical. Is everyone okay? Do you have food? Do you know what is happening? Then one neighbor writes something more disturbing. He asks whether the government could be responsible. Jason writes back, but the man responds with an even stranger warning. Protect your souls from them. Jason has no idea who them means, and he does not want Ruth and Graham obsessing over it. Hours pass. Night falls. The runner still has not returned. The written conversations become almost like a second household routine. Every morning, Jason checks which curtains have moved across the street and whether any new message has appeared. The neighbors compare food supplies, medical needs, and what they remember from the first day. One man keeps returning to the idea that somebody has deliberately sealed them in. Jason tries not to let that paranoia control the family, but privately he starts wondering the same thing. There are no sirens outside, no helicopters, no emergency broadcasts, and no sign that normal life is continuing beyond the neighborhood. Even stranger, the rain seems connected to every major change. Whenever it falls, the atmosphere outside looks distorted, almost as though the water itself is part of the barrier. Anne wants to believe there is still a logical explanation, while Jason becomes increasingly convinced that the explanation is something they were never prepared to understand. The children notice the tension between their parents even when nobody says anything. Ruth keeps asking questions, and Graham mostly stays quiet, watching his father for clues about how frightened he should be. At dinner, Jason tries to act confident. He tells the children that they are safe inside the house and that there is no reason to panic. Ruth is not convinced. Quietly, she tells Graham that maybe they are never getting out. That same night, Jason reveals something to Anne that makes her even more anxious. He bought a gun 2 weeks earlier. Anne is furious that he kept something like that from her. Jason explains that he had been having recurring nightmares about a disaster coming for the family. He cannot explain why, but the dreams felt so real that he wanted to be prepared. Anne barely sleeps. Later, she wakes to the sound of drilling downstairs. Jason is using a power tool against the wall, determined to create a hole. Every opening he makes closes almost immediately. He tries the same thing on another section, but the wall seems to regenerate around the drill. He finally explains what he thinks is happening. There is some kind of liquid barrier inside the structure, something that fills every gap and prevents outside air from entering. Whatever trapped them, he says, is not normal technology. In his mind, no ordinary human being could have built something like this. Jason sinks to the floor, exhausted and defeated. Anne is terrified too, but she refuses to let the children see it. She tells him to cover the damaged section of wall before Ruth and Graham notice. Jason places a large board over it and tries to act normal. The next morning, both parents wake with a brief, foolish hope that maybe the entire nightmare was a dream. They rush to the front door. It is still sealed. Ruth and Graham are already there, surprisingly calm. Anne asks whether they are okay. Ruth says yes. She trusts that her parents will figure something out. That simple faith changes the mood. Jason and Anne realize the children are depending on them, so they stop waiting for a quick rescue and begin preparing for a longer emergency. Jason pulls out his old record collection and announces that if they are going to be stuck together, the kids are finally going to hear some good music. The family creates routines. Toothpaste is rationed. Water is measured and stored. Food is sorted according to how quickly it will spoil. Anything that can last is protected. Nothing is thrown away without thinking. Even leftovers that would once have gone straight into the trash are carefully scraped into containers. They also have to think about the dog. He is old and sick, and his medicine will not last forever. Their new routine becomes painfully specific. Drinking water is measured into containers and labeled. Fresh food is eaten first, canned food is saved, and every meal gets smaller. The family stops using lights unless they absolutely need them. They collect rainwater where they can and reuse household items instead of throwing anything away. Jason turns ordinary furniture into storage and tools. Anne keeps an inventory of medicine, soap, batteries, and food, crossing off each item as it disappears. Ruth complains at first because she is still a child and cannot understand why one extra cookie matters, but even she eventually learns to ask before taking anything. Graham becomes more serious, trying to act older because he sees how much pressure his parents are carrying. The dog becomes another silent countdown. Every dose of medicine brings them one day closer to the moment when there will be none left. Jason hates looking at the bottle because it reminds him that there are problems he cannot fix with tools or determination. Jason spends time teaching the children practical things. He shows Graham how to clean and prepare fish. He teaches them how to repair small objects, how to improvise with what they have, and how to think before wasting anything. A week passes. They are still trapped. The outside world remains silent. Anne becomes almost obsessive about saving food. One night, after slicing a tomato, she carefully scrapes the tiny pieces clinging to the knife and stores them in the refrigerator. The family understands that even something that small may matter later. Jason keeps exchanging written notes with a neighbor who works as a dentist. Through those messages, they learn other families are running low too. Some have almost nothing left. The days blur together. Sometimes the family dances in front of the television to keep their spirits up. Other times, Jason attacks the doors again, unable to stop believing there must be some physical weakness he has missed. Then Ruth begins saying something strange. Ruth's descriptions of the woman outside grow more detailed over time. She says the figure never behaves like the frightened runner who was dragged away. Instead, it seems to stand in the rain and observe the house. Sometimes Ruth believes it raises a hand toward the glass. Other times she thinks it simply waits. Graham insists that bad weather can make shadows look like people, and Anne desperately wants that explanation to be true. Jason does not. He has already seen the glass repair itself, watched walls close around drill holes, and seen a human being pulled into a light by something invisible. To him, assuming Ruth is imagining things feels more dangerous than believing her. Still, he does not want her communicating with whatever is outside. He tells her that kindness can be misunderstood when fear is involved, and that nobody in the family should approach the windows during storms without another person present. Ruth agrees, although her curiosity never really disappears. While sitting with Graham, she casually mentions that the woman has come back again. Graham asks who she means. Ruth says the woman who appears every time it rains. Graham sees nothing. He assumes Ruth is imagining an animal through the rain and tells her not to worry. At dinner, Ruth brings it up again. She says she saw a woman outside trying to get into their home and tells everyone that Graham saw her too. Graham immediately denies it. Jason does not dismiss Ruth so easily. By now, several neighbors seem to have gone completely silent, and he fears Ruth may be seeing someone who has died. He sharply tells her not to stare out the windows at night, especially during the rain. Anne tries to rescue the mood by bringing out cookies she saved for New Year's Eve. The family begins decorating and creating little celebrations for the children. They discover that what the kids miss most is not actually restaurants, trips, or shopping. What makes them happiest is being together. Then another tragedy appears through the glass. Ruth looks toward the home of their neighbor, the dentist, and sees his wife at the window. The older woman is struggling, calling for help. Before anyone can do anything, she collapses. Ruth screams that they have to save her. Jason pulls his daughter away from the glass because there is nothing they can do. He knows the woman may be dying a few yards away, but their sealed home might as well be on another planet. Later, Ruth asks whether the woman died. Jason cannot bring himself to lie. He tells her that something terrible probably happened. Around the same time, the dog's condition gets worse. His medication is gone. Anne explains to the children that he is old and very sick and may only have a few hours left. That night, Ruth sits beside him, praying while heavy rain beats against the house. Curiosity gets the better of her. Ruth pulls back a curtain. A woman is standing directly outside the window. She looks exhausted, terrified, and almost wild. Ruth screams, waking everyone. The family rushes over and sees the stranger holding a sharp object, striking desperately at the glass. She is not attacking them. She is begging for help. Through the barrier, she warns them that everyone else is dead. She tells them not to let them see the family. She keeps repeating the same command, hide. Anne moves closer to the glass, horrified by the woman's condition. Before they can understand anything more, a brilliant light appears behind the stranger. The woman turns toward it, suddenly calm in a way that is even more frightening. She gives them one last warning to hide immediately. Then an invisible force violently pulls her backward. The family watches as she is dragged across the ground toward the light, unable to fight whatever has taken hold of her. Seconds later, she disappears. Now everyone believes Ruth. Jason sits with his daughter and asks about the other figure she has seen during previous storms. Ruth says that one is different. It is quiet, gentle. It never seems angry, and sometimes she feels as though it likes them. Jason tells her that anything keeping them imprisoned cannot truly care about them. That night, the entire family sleeps together in one bed. They decide to cover every window and make the house look empty whenever it rains. If the strange woman's warning was real, they do not want whatever is outside to know people are still alive. The next day, Jason notices even more neighboring homes have gone silent. He hides what he can from the children and announces that everybody is doing exercise instead. The family starts moving around the house, each person doing a different workout. Ruth, as usual, accidentally discovers something important. While exercising, she notices cracks appearing near the chimney. She calls the others over. The chimney is different from the walls. It is still open toward the top. Ruth immediately suggests climbing through it. Anne warns that the structure cannot support much weight. Ruth points out that she is the lightest person in the house. After arguing, the parents carefully rig a rope around her so they can pull her back down if anything goes wrong. Ruth climbs. The higher she goes, the more cracks she sees. She tells her parents not to touch anything. Finally, she reaches high enough to extend one hand near the opening. "I can feel the air," she calls down. For the first time in weeks, a member of the family is physically touching the outside world. Then the weather changes without warning. The wind becomes violent, and rain begins moving toward the house. Jason and Anne panic and immediately pull Ruth back down. Whatever controls the weather seems unwilling to let them reach the surface. Before they can develop another plan, the dog's suffering becomes unbearable. Anne tells the children that the medicine is gone and there is no way to save him. Jason asks her to take Ruth and Graham away and turn up the music. Alone with the animal, he makes the most painful decision of his life and ends its suffering. When it is over, Anne holds him and tells him he did the compassionate thing. The dog was in constant pain, and there was no treatment left. Now they have another problem. What do they do with the body? Jason decides to use the chimney. He considers cremating the dog, but when he sees a fox outside, he changes his mind and lowers the meat toward the animal instead. The fox sniffs it and walks away. The family's situation keeps getting worse. During the next rainfall, they immediately close all the curtains. Ruth suddenly remembers a plant near the window and runs back for it. Against every warning, she opens the curtain for 1 second. That is enough. Something outside notices movement. A shape approaches the house. For the first time, everyone sees the entity clearly enough to understand how unnatural it is. The silhouette has too many limbs to count, with arms and legs moving in ways no human body could. Ruth freezes. The creature remains outside, sensing for life, then eventually leaves. 3 months pass. Food becomes their biggest problem. At dinner, Ruth complains and marches toward the refrigerator to get something else. She opens the door and stops. It is empty. So are the cabinets. Every bit of stored food is gone. The family finally breaks emotionally. Anne collapses in grief. Graham stands by the fish tank screaming in frustration. Ruth runs to her room and buries her face in a pillow. Jason remains standing in the middle of the house, trying to hold everyone together when he feels just as desperate as they do. Then Graham returns carrying one of the fish. He has cleaned and prepared it exactly the way Jason taught him. He tells the family they can eat. Ruth eventually comes back downstairs. They hug each other, realizing that giving up would make every sacrifice meaningless. Jason now begins hunting outside without leaving the house. Using a scooter, rope, and scrap materials, he designs traps that can be lowered through the chimney. At first, he fails repeatedly. Then he experiments with bait and builds a stronger mechanism. Eventually, an animal is caught. Jason drags the trap upward, but something blocks the passage. He pulls harder until the trap suddenly falls back down empty. The family thinks they have lost their only chance. Then the animal itself drops through the chimney. For the first time in days, they have real meat. The loss of the dog also changes the children in ways Jason and Anne can see immediately. Ruth stops asking whether somebody is coming to rescue them. Graham becomes quieter and starts helping his father without being told. The adults realize the house is forcing their children to grow up in a world where every mistake has consequences. Jason tries to compensate by creating small moments that still feel like family life. He turns lessons into games, tells stories while they work, and lets the children help design simple tools. Anne keeps traditions alive whenever possible, even if a holiday meal is only a few carefully divided portions. They mark birthdays, invent decorations, and refuse to let fear become the only thing the children remember. At the same time, the parents privately discuss what will happen if food disappears completely. Neither wants to say the obvious answer aloud. Hunting through the chimney therefore becomes more than a food experiment. It is proof that the outside environment can still provide something, even if they cannot step into it. Every successful catch teaches Jason how the barrier behaves. Every failed attempt teaches him what materials will bend, what ropes will hold, and how much weight the chimney can take. When they finally begin growing plants indoors, the project becomes almost scientific. They test different sections of floor, save seeds from everything they eat, and create compost from scraps that once would have been thrown away. Ruth becomes fascinated by the first green shoots. Graham learns how to recognize when soil is too wet or too dry. Anne records which plants survive. Jason builds crude supports so vines can climb toward the limited light. Little by little, their prison develops an ecosystem of its own. This is what makes the later destruction of the garden so devastating. The creature does not simply destroy food. It destroys years of work, knowledge, and the closest thing the family has built to a future. That success inspires another idea. If they cannot bring food inside regularly, they will grow it. They tear up sections of the floor, create soil beds, experiment with compost, and slowly transform parts of the house into a garden. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. The family becomes incredibly skilled at surviving. They develop fertilizer. They create traps for birds and small animals. They even turn the garage area into a tiny nighttime movie theater when conditions allow it. They invent solutions for nearly everything. Then the film reveals just how much time has passed. Those 5 years change all 4 of them. Jason becomes an engineer out of necessity, building systems from broken appliances, cables, toys, kitchen equipment, and pieces of furniture. Anne becomes the organizer who tracks supplies, growing cycles, illnesses, and every improvement they make. Graham learns practical skills that most adults would never need, from preparing animals to repairing mechanisms and maintaining traps. Ruth grows up inside the sealed house, measuring childhood through storms, harvests, and marks on a homemade calendar instead of school years. They celebrate birthdays with whatever they can create. Gifts are handmade. Meals depend on what grows. Entertainment becomes old movies, records, stories, and games invented from scraps. The house slowly stops feeling like the place they were trapped in and becomes the only world the children truly understand. Outside, nature completely reclaims the streets. Trees push through pavement. Wild animals move between abandoned homes. The family's windows now look out on a forest instead of a neighborhood. Yet every time rain begins, the old terror returns instantly, reminding them that all their progress exists inside a prison they still cannot open. 5 years. The inside of the house now looks less like a home and more like a greenhouse. Plants grow across walls and floors. The family keeps written calendars so nobody loses track of birthdays or ages. Outside, the neighborhood has transformed into wilderness. Streets have disappeared under vegetation. Deer, foxes, and bears move through what used to be suburban roads. The family has also mastered the rain routine. The second drops begin falling, curtains close, traps secure, lights disappear, and everyone becomes silent. Then, one night, something impossible happens. The entity opens their front door. For the first time since the nightmare began, the sealed entrance moves. Everyone dives for cover. The creature enters the home. Up close, it appears to be made partly of water. Wherever it steps, the floor freezes beneath it. The family hides and barely breathes, terrified that any movement will reveal them. Unable to locate them, the creature lashes out at the indoor garden. It destroys the soil beds and ruins years of work before leaving. The front door remains open for a moment. Graham rushes toward it. Before he can escape, it slams shut again. Jason notices sunlight coming through small, damaged sections that once would have repaired instantly. Hope returns. Maybe the barrier is weakening. He reaches for the door handle while the entire family watches. It does not move, still sealed. Even after all those years, freedom remains a concept rather than a memory. Ruth can barely remember what an ordinary school day felt like. Graham has learned more about survival than he ever learned in a classroom. Anne sometimes catches herself looking at old family photographs and being shocked by how young everyone appears. Jason avoids doing that too often because it makes the lost time feel unbearable. Still, none of them completely gives up. Every unexplained change in the barrier becomes a clue. Every crack, every strange sound, and every moment when sunlight appears where it should not is examined. Jason writes down what happened before each change, hoping to discover a pattern. Ruth does the same with the creature, remembering which storms brought it close and which ones passed quietly. Their separate observations slowly lead them toward the same possibility. Perhaps the barrier is not simply a cage. Perhaps it is responding to them. That idea is frightening because it means something outside has been aware of the family for years. But it also offers the first real reason to believe that communication might be possible. That possibility changes the way Jason thinks about the final confrontation. If the creature can choose when to enter, when to destroy, and when to leave, then maybe it can also choose to release them. Killing it might feel satisfying, but understanding it could be the only path that leads outside, at all. Ruth begins reading old books about the history of the city. She discovers that long ago, the entire region had once been connected to the sea. That gives her a new theory. Maybe the creatures are not trying to invade human land. Maybe humans built their city on something that already belonged to them. Maybe the force trapping everyone is actually reclaiming its own territory. No one knows if she is right. Their immediate problem is the garden. After the entity damaged the soil, almost everything begins dying. Then an automatic trap catches a small animal. Ruth finds it alive and feels sorry for it. She releases it before anyone can stop her. The animal bites her. Within hours, the wound becomes infected. Her fever rises, and the family realizes she needs antibiotics. They have none. Anne refuses to accept that they survived 5 years only to lose their daughter to an infection. Jason tries another desperate escape. He climbs into the car in the garage and drives directly at the sealed door. The car crumples on impact while the barrier remains untouched. Jason is injured but notices cracks in the floor. He follows them. Using tools, he tries breaking through. Metal bends against the strange material, but Jason refuses to stop. Anne begs him not to collapse the structure on top of them. Then he finds something different. A large drainage passage. The tunnel may connect to another house. That changes everything. Their neighbor was a dentist. If they can reach his home, there may still be medication inside. Anne volunteers to go. She does not want Jason risking himself when the children would be left helpless if he died. They secure a rope around her and give her a small transmitter so they can communicate. Anne enters the drain. The passage is tight, dark, and filled with years of decay. Eventually, she reaches the neighboring house. Then the signal cuts out. The last thing Jason hears is Anne screaming. He panics and starts attacking the floor again, desperate to reach her. Graham watches the windows and suddenly realizes his mother has made it into the house across from them. The transmitter crackles back to life. Anne explores the abandoned home. Bodies have decomposed inside, covered in insects. The sight is horrifying, but she keeps searching until she finds medicine. Antibiotics. She is overjoyed. Then the temperature changes. The entity begins forming inside the house. Anne runs. She tries to escape through the drainage passage but discovers bodies blocking part of the way. The creature appears behind her. Anne fires the gun, but the bullets do nothing. She crawls and fights her way back to the opening. Jason pulls her through and immediately seals the passage with broken bricks. They give Ruth the antibiotics. Her fever finally starts to improve. For the first time, the family understands something important. They survived direct contact with the entity. Anne entered another house and returned. Maybe the creatures are not invincible. Maybe hiding forever is no longer their only option. Besides, their garden is dead. Their food system is collapsing again. They decide to fight. Jason builds weapons and traps designed to immobilize the creature. Their plan is to lure it inside, chain it, and burn it. When the next rain begins, everyone takes position. But the entity does not attack the way they expect. Instead, water starts pouring into the house. Faucets turn on by themselves. Water explodes through pipes, the chimney, the bathroom, and every opening. Within minutes, the entire home is flooding. The family's carefully prepared traps become useless. The final flood becomes the most chaotic test they have faced. Nothing stays where it belongs. Furniture floats through rooms, tools disappear underwater, and the carefully built garden breaks apart around them. Jason keeps shouting instructions, but the noise of rushing water makes communication almost impossible. Anne tries to keep Ruth near her while searching for Graham, and every few seconds another small creature appears through the rising water. Their movements are strange but coordinated, as if the entire house has become part of one living system. The family fights only because there is nowhere left to retreat. Jason's chains catch one creature. Anne uses fire when she gets the chance. Graham risks his life for equipment because he understands that the family will drown without it. Ruth, weakened from the recent infection, still refuses to leave anyone behind. What finally saves them is not a perfect plan. It is a collection of desperate improvisations built from everything they have learned over 5 years. When the drain opens and the water begins dropping, nobody feels victorious. They are exhausted, injured, and still trapped. That is why Jason's anger at the chained creature becomes so intense. In his mind, this thing represents every lost neighbor, every hungry night, the dog, the ruined garden, and the years stolen from his children. Jason is separated from the others in the rising water. Anne tries to break through a window and suddenly sees smaller creatures outside, versions of the larger entity. They begin entering the house. There are dozens of them. One of Jason's traps finally ignites a creature, but fire barely slows it. The thing grabs Anne with one of its many limbs and throws her across the room. Another attacks Jason. Graham shouts for everyone to climb toward the highest part of the house while he goes back for equipment they need to survive. Anne looks at her son like she may never see him again. Graham swims through the flooding rooms with a creature following only feet behind him. He reaches the equipment, turns back, and barely escapes as the thing lunges after him. Jason grabs his son when Graham reaches the surface. The family gathers at the highest point they can reach. The glass above them is still sealed. Water rises. Creatures close in. Then part of Jason's emergency system finally works. A drain opens, lowering the water level. At the same time, one of the larger creatures becomes trapped in the chains Jason built. As the water drains, family members are thrown in different directions, separated again. Eventually, they regroup near the front door, still locked. Jason finally loses control. He drags the chained creature toward the door and threatens it. If it does not let them out, he is going to kill it. The creature struggles while Jason raises a sharp tool. Ruth stops him. She reminds him that if he kills the only creature they have captured, they may lose their only chance to understand how the door works. Then Jason remembers every strange moment from the past 5 years. Ruth saying one of the entities seemed gentle. A hand pressed against the glass. The sense that something outside was trying to communicate rather than attack. Jason lowers the weapon. They release the creature. For a moment, everyone expects it to turn on them. Instead, it stands. Then it opens the front door. The family steps outside for the first time in 5 years. All around them, countless creatures are gathered. Their neighborhood is collapsing into the earth. Houses sink as water swallows what remains of the town. Ruth was right. This place belonged to the sea long before humans claimed it. The creatures were reclaiming it. Jason, Anne, Ruth, and Graham run through the ruined landscape until they reach a yacht. They climb aboard and push away from the disappearing city. They appear to be the only human family left alive. Jason looks at Anne and asks where they should go now. She gives the only answer that makes sense. Anywhere that belongs to us. Anywhere we actually have the right to be. The family sails away from the place that imprisoned them for 5 years, carrying nothing but each other and the knowledge that survival did not come from strength alone. It came from adapting, listening, and finally understanding that the force they feared may never have seen itself as the invader. Then, just when it feels as though the nightmare is finally over, the yacht breaks down. The engine dies. The boat drifts helplessly across the water, and there is no one anywhere nearby to rescue them.